Hello and welcome to the PetaPixel podcast. My name is Jaron Schneider and I'm joined by Jordan Drake and Chris Nichols. This is the first episode of the PetaPixel podcast and we have a really packed schedule. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the last week that we want to talk about. Nikon is blocking third-party batteries. What is going on with outdoor photographer? Leica's Q series had published wrong specifications for years. Ring employees have spied on their customers. And guys, where is your Fujifilm XS20 review?
Oh, you too?
Finally, Photoshop Generative Fill has been just incredible and caused a lot of chatter online. And then our main story today, we're going to talk about Apple's wild launch week. There was so much that came out yesterday at WWDC, and we're going to get into it. Let's get started. So it occurs to me that probably everyone watching this has no idea who I am. My name is Jaron Schneider. I am the editor-in-chief of PetaPixel, and Jordan Drake and Chris Nichols are two of my favorite people, good friends of mine, and we decided to start a podcast. So for anyone who is listening to this who doesn't know who these two gentlemen are, I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'm Jordan Drake. I've been shooting that guy over. I don't know which side of the frame he's going to be on, but the one with the hair. I guess they both have hair. Anyways, I do the video review portions, shoot, direct. I've been doing the camera review shows for a long time, and it's great to be on here because I do have to say very quickly, one of my favorite photography podcasts was the Art of Photography podcast that Jaron was on previously. And I loved going on that show. And now I get to do a show with Jaron. This is wonderful.
I remember getting texts from you about stuff that we were talking about on the podcast. And you said you used to watch it or listen to it while you were doing dishes.
Correct.
Because who's that other guy on here?
Yeah. I'm Chris Nichols, and I've been playing a photographer on TV for many, many years, over a decade. And I've been working with those two now.
We don't know.
Yeah, somewhere, one of those guys. And it's been great. I mean, moving to PetaPixel has been a really good move. I'm enjoying the variety of work that we're doing, getting to shoot more about photography, less technical. And it's been really good. So I'm enjoying the ride.
Fantastic. So before we get into our news topics, we need to thank the sponsor of this podcast. It would not be possible without them. And that sponsor is OM System. They have been, for over 80 years, pushing the limits of technology to put their most advanced cameras and lenses in the hands of photographers and visual creators. Whether photographing grizzly bears in the Alaskan wilderness, documenting the most remote landscapes in the world, or capturing those once-in-a-lifetime moments with your family, the OM System line of cameras and lenses was designed for the task. You guys actually like OM System, right? You guys, this is like the not sponsored part. I do believe you guys actually like OM System, previously known as Olympus.
You know, I've sort of been a Micro Four Thirds apologist now for a long time. You know, I feel like we were the last ones to be like, it's great. I love it. I like the small format. I always have. But I actually not just like OM System. I use their cameras for my work with Bow River Trout Fitters. So that's the main camera. I'm going out shooting an OM1, 12 to 100. You know, that small kit. I drove over the last Olympus, the previous kind of company, with a truck, and it survived in the mud. I thought that was pretty.
You literally drove over.
Now, I may have left the camera on the top of the wheel in the wheel well.
The worst storage solution.
That doesn't matter. That part of the story is completely pointless. Don't worry about it. But I drove over the camera and it survived. So, I like how rugged they are. I like how I can be around the water. I like how compact it is. And the stabilization handheld's been fantastic. So I don't have to bring a tripod or anything. So I actually use it every week.
I don't think anyone knows that about you, Chris. I'm glad you shared that. Speaking of that ruggedness, and we're just like going off riffing now. I have more script. I'm probably not going to read it now.
Talking about my beard? I did shave it recently. I know, right? Yeah.
Jeez, now I'm touching.
Us fly fishermen, we're a strong breed.
You were mentioning the ruggedness of the cameras. We did a story last year, I think, where they sent us pictures of how they test those things, and the actual rig they put those
The
cameras
jets.
into. Yeah, they fire stuff at it, the jet system. But the other one that's crazy is like their dust protection one. They fire like a fine white powder at the cameras for like a long time. They get caked in it. It is the coolest thing. I'll see if I can throw some pictures up for those who are watching us on YouTube. But I will link to that story in the video description if you're curious to see just how crazy their testing apparatus is. Nobody else does this in the camera world. It is wild to me that they made cameras with interchangeable lenses this rugged. So thank you again to OM System for making truly incredible cameras that people need to use more of, that Chris Nichols uses all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Still the best video stabilization out there as well. So
visit omsystem.com to take advantage of their spring sale, where you can save up to 40% on brand new OM System cameras and the highly respected M Zuiko lens series. All right, let's get to the stories. This is one that actually is somewhat relevant because you guys just finished your Z8 review. Nikon is apparently, or at least it's said that they are, blocking third-party batteries. We have not gotten an official comment from Nikon about this, but what are you guys' thoughts on this?
This is something they've done before. I mean, it's not new, right? I mean, they did this back in the SLR days. And I think from a corporate standpoint, obviously it's easy to do it because you want more profits, but also you can say things like, we don't want third-party batteries to overheat and explode and get damaged. But I think really the track record on third-party batteries is pretty good. I really don't think there's any sort of reason to stay away from it. At the same time, I guess if I was buying a Z8, I don't know what camera you were talking about, Z8, I don't know what that is. If I was buying a Z8, it's an expensive investment. And because of the reduced battery life, just given that it's a smaller battery, I would want probably the latest and greatest. I mean, that's what I would personally do. But I get that people have third-party batteries. They've invested money in it. It's sad that they don't work.
Well, I think the big issue there is that we didn't know this until it started getting into customers' hands. I mean, we certainly tested it.
Yeah,
we're not going to test battery life with a third-party battery. I wish there was some heads up, because this is still a professional camera. It's not the flagship D5, but a lot of pros are going to use this. And it would suck if they, use their first-party Nikon battery. They're out in the field. They switch to their other 15B battery that worked just fine before and find out the camera won't accept it while they're on a gig. So I wish they were just a little bit more forthright about that. But like Chris said, we've seen this before. I remember Sony M batteries for the longest time was like, no one could hack that. There were a bunch of third-party batteries that didn't work. Eventually, the third-party camera companies just figured out how to do it. And I expect we'll see something similar with this down the road. But for the time being, you are going to have to pony up for the Nikon first party, I suspect.
You guys bring up a good point that this is not new.
No.
It's just getting a lot of attention now because Louis Rossmann did a video on it, and he's done now I think 3 or 4 videos specifically on camera companies. He did at least one on Canon, because Canon would not sell a woman in Australia a screw to fix her own out of warranty camera, which of course the right to repair there's a lot of stuff in the camera industry that is not caught up with the rest of the tech industry. Like, nobody steals iPhones anymore because you can't get into them, but people still steal cameras. So there's like a whole discussion on that sort of stuff. But one of the things that I was thinking about when it came to batteries is one of the reasons I think these companies do this, and it's not to screw over the third-party manufacturers that are making actually good batteries. It's the ones that are trying to make batteries that look like Nikon but aren't. So I have a Canon camera here that I'm using right now to shoot this podcast, and I have a couple batteries, and a friend of mine sold me a few of these batteries, and one of them, if you shake it, you can hear it rattling around in there. He bought that under the guise that it was a first party battery.
Right.
So that's what they're trying to stop. That battery doesn't work in my most recent cameras because the voltages aren't right. Like, it can't hold power very well, and it dies too quickly, or it can't hold it consistently enough to operate the camera. That's what I think they're trying to avoid. And it just so happens that they put like a chip in there that tells the camera that it's not a first party battery.
In my day, batteries didn't have computers inside them. You'd have a battery tester, you'd push on both sides, and then this bar would fill up, and that was all we needed.
The ones I remember.
That was all we needed. And now it's just a rigmarole conflaborate.
So We'll get to this because we have a whole section at the end of this video where we are going to answer some questions in the comments from both YouTube and PetaPixel.com.
Oh boy.
But yeah, you guys get to do that. But one of the questions that we got is, why didn't you mention this in your Z8 review? And I think that's probably because your Z8 review was basically done before you knew this was a possibility of being an issue.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. And it's tough to be surprised. I mean, it is sad. I'm all for companies being able to make profits other than the original manufacturers. And I'm also all for like trying to reduce how many lithium batteries we have rolling around in the garbage out there, so I totally get that. But it's hard to be surprised just because, as we said, we've seen it before, and I'm sure we'll see it again in the future. Lots.
All right, we're going to move on to the next topic. Outdoor photographer, imaging resource, digital photo pro. These are some storied brand names in the photo industry, and they feel like they've been in limbo now for several months. We still don't know what's going on. The last thing that I was made aware of was that Imaging Resource was sold to Gigster. And the person who told me that is one of the two people that works for Bebop, the company that purchased these brands before. And if anyone doesn't know who Bebop is, I don't blame you. They specifically do music and live performances live streamed on a website. I think you could, if you were desperate, you could find some way to stream them to your TV. But they purchased all of Madavor Media, which owned all of these brands, in order to get one brand, which was Jazz Times. And now these have all been sort of in limbo. Most of the people were let go or fired. Almost nobody works at these publications anymore. What are you guys' thoughts on what happened here?
Yeah, and I think the first thing that's important to think, I mean, Outdoor Photographer is a huge magazine. I think we all grew up with it, and that it's sad to see that change. But also, it's not just photography, right? I mean, Bebop, as I understand, bought a whole bunch. They got a whole bunch of magazines from many different fields. And I think everybody's suffering from this, right? And I think the big issue is a lot of contributors aren't getting paid. So first, let me take this opportunity to say PetaPixel has been paying us promptly. We really appreciate that. But, it's a scary time, right? I mean, what's going on with DP Review? There's lots of confusion there, right? What's going on with print media in general? I don't know. Like, are we going to see magazines disappear off shelves? Is this kind of the death knell for that? I don't know. But website, digital stuff, I think that's still doing very well. And it's funny that it seems like they're letting it go, right? It seems like Bebop, in this case, is kind of letting it go.
I think like what's been fascinating with this is how incredibly disorganized everything seems. Like every other day, there's a new news story about like, you won't believe what is going on with this Madavor acquisition. Like it seems incredibly disorganized. Jaron had an interview with was it the president?
The guy who owned the
seemed
CEO.
Like he seemed like he slapped it together in a rage. His he doesn't seem to know how like PR works. And then, to have the website Imaging Resource just suddenly blink out of existence, direct to Outdoor Photographer, which then also went away. And now Imaging Resource is back and they're saying they're selling. It's like no one thought this through. And again, it is very similar to like the DP Review thing of like, what the hell's going on? I have no idea. All of this stuff confusing. Just seems like crazy corporate mismanagement of like really important properties with good information, And again, my heart goes out to all the people who have been like, if someone said, you want to write an article for Outdoor Photographer, I'd be like, yeah, that's a prestigious magazine. Of course I will. You would not expect that they're never going to send you a check for your hard work. So I don't put the blame on the photographers at all there, unlike Bebop, man.
Well, and his answers were very evasive, right? I mean, like if you've ever spent time talking to anybody in any, industry and you hear those kind of responses, it feels fishy, right? It sounds a little bit, I don't know, very evasive. Like, aren't people getting paid like $20 a week or something like that in some cases?
It is wild. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, right?
He didn't say that wasn't happening. Like he didn't deny it. Like, so I had multiple people come and tell me how much they're getting paid by Bebop.
Yeah. But that's sad. Like one thing that I do like, I mean, DP Review has been a confusing experience for sure, but all we wanted was for all the staff there to keep working and have places and jobs and employment. So I'm happy to see that seems to be going forward. So that's great. I mean, that's what we wanted for them. And I don't think they're getting paid $20 a week. I think they're getting taken care of, I hope. So, but yeah, it's weird that it's so secretive and it's so confusing.
Yeah. The DP Review thing wasn't something I intended to talk about, but it is like something definitely happened. for sure, because they took
The
down the
tone
closure
has
notice.
changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
And
very strange situation.
every response to a comment from someone who works there always has like a winky face or a smiley face or something lately.
Just
So,
ellipses. All they
yeah,
do is just text back
yeah,
ellipses.
yeah.
I'm convinced that someone bought them. I
Mhm.
think that happened, but I have no idea who that might be
Yeah.
and when they're going to get that all figured out. I'm assuming it's taking a while because corporate to move
Yes.
assets and decide how they're going to deal with all that. And like DP Review is like super plugged into Amazon for his like buying stuff, right? So unplugging it has to be a monumental task.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's sad. Let's talk about something else.
Happier.
So
Do you have a happy story, Jaron?
it's a weird one. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was talking to Chris about this actually. I asked him if he was aware there was a leaf shutter in the Q3, and I think he said maybe. I can't remember what he told
Yeah.
me.
We just kind of assumed so, right? Given the fixed lens of it, given the fact that sync speeds were supported to quite high speeds, it made sense. But you know, we never really thought about it. I mean, who shoots flash anymore? Hey, anybody?
No, well, but this is actually a conversation we had during the review. I was like, do we need to do a demonstration of the high speed sync on this?
Yeah.
Again. And it was just a decision like, no, it's like marketed primarily as a street camera, things like that. Like, but I was unaware that they were publishing the wrong sync speeds.
Yeah,
like
so
you were
they
saying
got
up
it
front.
right. Yeah, they got it right for the Q3, but we went back in time and looked, and we were like, have they changed any of these mechanics? Our assumption was they'd only changed the sensor and a couple of the other things in there, but they hadn't actually changed the lens. That has been the same through the whole Q series. So why would they change the shutter mechanism? And they haven't. I went back and asked them about it. They double checked with Germany because in the Q series, the original, and then the Q2, it did not show the same sync speeds that the Q3 was capable of. And I thought that was super weird.
Yeah, very weird.
Emailed me back. The engineers said, "We thank PetaPixel for surfacing a blind spot in our technical data, enabling a correction now reflected in our materials." So yeah, they forgot to mention, or they didn't do it right, or something went wrong.
Just chalk it up to a typo.
Yeah,
basically.
Essentially, this whole time, yes, it's a leaf shutter, and this whole time you've been able to sync with flashes at as fast as it can fire the shutter, which is, I think, interesting because this camera now has capabilities for high-end studio work, especially since the new one is very high megapixel.
Right.
It creates very pretty images. I don't see why you couldn't use this in studio. It makes it a lot more versatile than I think the Q gets credit for.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, the Fujifilm X100 series, one of my favorite portraits I've taken of my kid was like a strobe portrait with that camera. I was like, oh, it's so great to have a small camera with a super fast sync. You can do some fun environmental portraits with it. And yeah, it's awesome that the Q series gives you that same capability. I'm just really kicking myself that we didn't emphasize that in our review.
Well, it's not your fault because these camera companies, Fujifilm, Panasonic, Leica, none of them talk about sync speed at all.
Yeah.
And it's like one of the things that you can point to is like, this is a legitimate reason to buy not only this style of camera, but also not a smartphone.
Like it's funny. I wonder if the listeners appreciate, like, as camera reviewers, when we go to these press events, right, and they talk about a lot of the features, they do their keynote speeches. There's obviously a lot they want to talk about, and then there's things that they don't necessarily mention or they don't even know because they're still pre-production. And so we go through those tech spec lists like hawks, right? We look at everything. We're like, oh, and then if you see a difference like the sync speed, then hand goes up. That's the question you ask. Hey, wait a minute. Does this? Why do we have this better sync speed? So a typo might just seem like a silly thing on a website, but actually for camera reviewers, we look at that stuff very carefully. We make a lot of decisions and assumptions based off of a lot of those numbers.
Kind of a bit of a segue to a previous topic. The only reason I was like, there's something fishy here is that the Q2 was tested at DP Review for specs that did not agree with the spec sheet. So that's really what, for me, like raised an eyebrow. So like, yeah, DP Review still doing the Lord's work.
Doing good work there, yeah.
All right, here's one that's kind of tangential, but I think it's worth talking about because it is somewhat camera related and privacy related. The Federal Trade Commission has charged home security company Ring with customer privacy violations, including allowing any employee or contractor to access a consumer's private videos.
Ooh, sexy.
a proposed order, inappropriate, Chris. A
Oh,
proposed
sorry.
order, which requires approval by a federal court to go into effect, outlines demands and punitive measures against Ring, an Amazon-owned company, including Ring delete its data, models, and algorithms that it created using videos unlawfully viewed and analyzed.
I mean, first of all, I want to give the disclosure. Whenever Chris says sexy, he means horrifying. So just keep that in mind, everyone.
Yeah, I've got a real issue with,
It's a tick. Don't worry about it. But I mean, it seems like we're seeing so many of these because didn't like Tesla just have the
Tesla
same thing?
I was
year?
about to point at that. Yeah, Tesla's like their employees had direct access to the cameras in the cars, and they could sit there and watch people in real time from computers in the offices, and then they'd point and laugh with each other.
I shouldn't have to wear pants in my own home. And I'm going to continue not to, but I wonder what my Google Nest picks up.
Yeah,
Who knows?
I mean, they haven't been caught with anything, but who's to say that will never happen? It's just like this stories just surface, and you're like, wow, I've had a Ring camera in my house for 3 years.
Yeah,
it's just watching.
Jaron,
what?
Yikes.
No, I was speaking like I don't use.
Oh, hypothetically.
Yeah, I don't actually have a Ring camera.
Okay.
I try not to purchase these some of these types of products, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't.
Yeah, it's one.
Yeah,
it's one
I
of
just
those
wonder
things
how many
where-
more are going to break.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like people come out with all these horror stories on the internet, right? And there's all these memes and like, oh, these people are watching you, blah, blah, blah. And we chalk it up to like, you're crazy. You're a conspiracy theory coot. But I guess, yeah, some people are watching.
Those, even if you were to sit there and read those whole privacy documents that they make you click, I agree to, and that's not in there. So it's not, nobody reads
That'd
those
be great
anyway.
if
But
At the bottom,
at the
like,
bottom, it's like,
Steve-
hey, just by
yeah.
the way, your employees are gonna watch your videos and
Yeah.
rate them.
Steve and
comment them.
Cheryl will be viewing you from the hours of.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
I mean,
your content will not be placed on the internet, but it may be used for humorous commentary amongst the staff at Christmas parties.
They
It
will
is-
print out with a laser printer images of you in your home and laugh at them when they walk by the lunchroom.
I mean, we would see some stuff back in the days of processing film, but those people knowingly brought that film in, right? I mean, they knew what we were going to see. I mean, then there was always an awkward or enjoyable conversation when you handed their photos.
I think back when I worked in a lab, so many people thought it just goes through a machine. Like, so, but then we're also supposed to be like, if someone has a really good picture, make sure you put like a great shot sticker in there. Or something. And a lot of people saw that and they're just like, eyes start turning around. What have I developed in the last 10 years?
Oh boy.
all right, so we got 2 more topics in this section. We're going to talk a little bit about. Did you guys pay any attention to Photoshop Generative Fill in the last week? Because that came out and just
hard not
blew.
to.
Yeah, right. It just
Yeah.
blew up. Give me your thoughts.
I don't know. Like on the one hand, I'm like the box is already open, right? Pandora's box is open. Everything's leaking out. So it's like, what's the big deal? It's smart, right? It makes sense that you would just be able to use that. It's interesting that they're getting all of their deep learning from Adobe stock images or photos that people have used on Photoshop and contributed. And
That
whatnot.
part's not true, actually.
No. Good.
So Adobe is very much putting like they did it ethically. So
Okay.
there was a story a couple of months ago where there was like someone discovered a thing in their contract or their user agreement that basically said Adobe can look at what you're doing and learn from it or whatever. And Adobe specifically said they weren't using that to train an AI generator. They were using it, I think, mainly just to see how photos are being edited on their platform, just as general data. They weren't taking your pictures and turning them into anything. So their Firefly algorithm, which is the one that they use for making images, that is based only on public domain and images on Adobe stock, which is probably why it's not as good as the other ones, is because its data set training is much smaller. But even with that, they allowed it to do the thing that OpenAI advertised that they were working on like 7 months ago, which is like, it's called outpainting in OpenAI in DALL-E, where you can expand an image beyond that. So that's what generative fill is for anyone who has somehow managed to not hear about it. Is you can tell a picture to go beyond its borders, and Adobe will add stuff that it thinks would fit in that, and you get some very interesting results. Depending on that, and you can actually give it better prompts, give it more direction.
And it
But
just makes like a new layer, right? So you can move, like
yes,
if you wanted something in the sky, right, you could say, give me rich puffy clouds, and then it can build you a layer, AI based, and then you can just have that over your plain sky, right? So it makes
It,
sense. It goes beyond just cutting out somebody you don't like in a family photo, or it goes beyond like getting rid of an annoying street sign or something like that. I like, are we reaching a point one day where we don't actually have to go out with our cameras? Is that the idea, that we can just build? Are you excited about
Jordan
that,
is
Jordan?
shaking his head at you.
no, I mean, like it's insanely useful. I used to work at a blacks photography where one of the services we offered was, like Chris said, retouching, like remove your X. We used to call them sluggoectomies back there. Um, but one of the big things that our artists were always doing is manually building an extended background so that you could add people or make the composition work while you were doing that. And I mean, now we're working in a thing where your capture format is almost never your delivery. You know, like we have to stick stuff in all kinds of different aspect ratios. It's incredibly useful. I mean, the thing that drives me crazy is so many people like showing a clip from Good, Bad, and the Ugly, which has the best close-ups maybe of any movie ever. And they're like, look, we can now extend it so you can see the whole desert. And it's like, you don't understand anything about composition. Like, this is not an improvement. So it's going to be misused like a lot of other stuff. But my big thing is, I like this because it's something that's actually practically useful, but it's not as easy to actually, like, what's the word, like create a false narrative with it as it is with a lot of the other AI stuff that I find
No,
truly horrifying right now.
it's just like,
And I can think of useful, like for video especially, tons of uses for this, for, you know, vertical to horizontal reframing even. It's great.
yeah, but it's like, back in the day, we've been able to take a landscape that we really like the foreground of, and then previously we shot like a beautiful sky from a completely separate photo, and it
Yeah.
was, now it's rudimentary to take that sky and put it over that landscape. But now we can just take the landscape and say, let's try this, and it'll show you like four different skies, and you can pick which one you like better, right? Like,
You don't need
you
to
don't
shoot
even have to go out
backplates
and take the
anymore. Yeah.
yeah, you don't even have to go out and take the second photo, right? I mean, and then it's like, well, you don't even have to take the first photo, right? I mean, that's what our AI imaging is doing right now.
I
So
mean, it is removing the necessity of shooting backplates and stuff like that. So like
yeah,
from that sense, the picture that I was going, let's say I was doing this, the picture that I was going to make wasn't real already. It was already a lie. So like if that,
Mhm.
for those types of images, it's very common in real estate, sky
sure.
replacements. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that already was just done as like already almost unbelievable. This doesn't really change that much
No,
at all. It just
no.
removes the
So
step.
I think it's just we're getting inundated with so much of this new AI stuff. I think what Photoshop's doing makes a lot of sense. It actually, as Jordan says, really is. It's not just like a fun thing to try out by entering a prompt. It's actually a very useful tool of convenience, I think, for photo editing. So I think it's very powerful. It makes sense. At the same time, I think what I'm waiting for anyways is, when are we going to see the regulations start to come in, right? When are we going to have the regulations really starting to come in that say, okay, this image has to be labeled that it was created and composited and generated, and this image hasn't been touched, right? I know we do that a bit in journalism, but you know, is that wall going to break down too? Who knows?
The
Who
other
knows?
thing that I thought about was like copyright. So
Sure.
if I take someone else's picture and I use generative fill to make, and now this picture is just the center of a much larger image that has been created. So now it's not even 50% of the original picture. Uh, can that person whose picture, let's say I stole and made this art with,
Yeah.
do they have any recourse? Can they stop me from doing that? Because then can't I say that through
You're just taking
Transformative.
samples to create
yeah,
your
is it
visual
transformative?
sick
So
beats. Yeah.
yeah, is it well, according to a lawyer that I talked to, he says that we should be protected as photographers from that happening to us, but we won't know unless someone takes it to court.
Right.
So it is really just lawless out there until someone decides to sue. There needs to be, at some point, someone needs to throw the hammer down. And the thing is, that can take so long. We just got that ruling about the picture that was stole a picture and turned it into another picture, and that finally
Yeah.
got rule. I can't remember the name of the. I'm blanking on it right now. But famous artist. Come on, guys, help me out here.
I don't know any famous
Uh,
artists.
Yes.
Hold on, loading. It's Warhol, Andy Warhol. There we go. Andy
Thank
Warhol.
you.
Can't believe it. My brain, just total brain fart. Andy Warhol, that picture was found to be not transformative, and it was a copyright violation. But that picture, that whole situation happened so long ago. Like, that's how long it takes to get things like decided, and it's frustrating for anyone who's trying to protect their work now, because there's no rules. So, all right, last topic I want to talk about, and this kind of touches on stuff we're going to talk about later in the podcast. We're going to go over comments, but where's your Fujifilm XS20 review, guys? Why don't you have one?
I'd love to say we've been working on it for 6 weeks. It's so in depth. We've just uncovered incredible new things other people are touching. But
traveled to 3 different countries.
We haven't got one. Chris, expand on that.
You want me to expand on it? Yeah. We're just you need a camera in your hands to actually take photos with it and review it. So that's been the problem, is we don't have a camera in our hands physically. And the company that would have normally sent said camera hasn't sent said camera. Is that about right, Jordan?
Yeah, I think people can infer from that.
When is this? Do you guys know when it's supposed to be on store shelves? Like when we could actually go to the camera store and just get one?
I know it's like a June release. So yeah, I mean, we've done this before. Like back with DP Review, we were not getting a Pentax K3 Mark III. We got kind of the runaround on that for months and months, and eventually it hit market. We grabbed the demo from the camera store here in Calgary, who has always been incredibly good to us, and we were able to review that. Well, initially review. We never had it for long enough to do what we consider a full review.
Yeah.
But we've already spoken to them here in Calgary. And if it does come to that, then that's exactly what we're going to do with the XS20. Because it seems like a huge mistake on their part. Like, this is a camera I've been asking for. Like, I think it's the best hybrid camera under $1,500 right now. It's crazy they're not trying to get it into as many reviewers' hands as possible.
We will review
we find some weird quirk that no one else is talking about. It just seems like kind of a home run. And Chris was a huge fan of the XS10.
Yeah. And
so
it's
I'm looking right now, June 29th is when it's supposed to hit stores, and it's probably going to be sold out for a while. So hopefully we can get you one, but
yeah, it's wild. I mean, we're going to review the Pentax monochrome camera too, right? As soon as we get our hands on one. But yeah, there's like an ebb and a flow to the whole review world about, sometimes the tides are up and sometimes the tides are down. Is that vague enough?
I can do a bit of a history lesson, actually, that the first pre-production camera we ever got back in the camera store days was the Fuji X1, the FinePix X100, they were still calling it back then, which kicked off the X series that led to them actually being, as successful as they are right now. So they loved us then. I know it's changed.
All I'll say about that, because again, obviously we're beating around a bush and we don't want to, but first off, like, our Fujifilm reviews always do really well, right? I mean, we brought them a lot of press, a lot of views. We've always been the kind of reviews that we're going to be very honest about products, right? That's always been our hallmark from the very beginning. If we don't like something, we're going to say it. If we find a problem, we're going to reveal it, right? I mean, that's why we're such a good fit for PetaPixel now as well. And so it's in that same vein, we have in the past upset certain companies or had issues and stuff like that. But I will say in this particular case, I don't feel like we've done anything wrong. It was all within the mandate of what we were given rein to do. But there's some internal stuff there too, I'm sure. And a lot of it we can't speak on because we don't know. But regardless, we don't have a camera in our hands. And that's why we are begging and pleading people to ship them to us. We'll review it and we'll say your name and we'll give you a big hug if we ever see you. Jordan will. Jordan will give you I
keep seeing this comment.
I'm the better hugger.
Video.
That's debatable. That's very debatable.
I haven't hugged either of you. I don't think so. I can't break this tie.
We've hugged. Jaron, we've hugged.
Well, we got to
obviously I'm not very good because you didn't remember it.
Yeah, I don't remember that hug. So
flying to Portland.
So anyway, anyone who keeps asking in the comments, where is it?
We'll direct them to this podcast.
Listen to the podcast.
Yes.
You'll find out. All right. So now with the news of the last week out of the way, the main story this week is we're going to talk about Apple products.
Yeah, you had a little vacation there, hey?
Yeah. Okay. So typically, the way I would like this podcast to go is I do the least talking of this. I'm just the host. You guys are the stars. But yesterday, I was at WWDC at Apple Park. I sat there and I watched the release of all the products, the 2-hour stream. I was there in person. I'm here to answer all your questions. So, for those who weren't paying attention, which is completely forgivable, they released finally the Mac Pro. It is back, powered by Apple Silicon. They have a new Mac Studio, which now has an M2 Ultra, which is the next generation of their Apple Silicon. Then they also released a 15-inch MacBook Air powered by M2. And then, of course, tons of software updates because it was a developer conference. So we are seeing all the stuff that's coming down the line for both Mac OS, iOS, and then iPad OS, and then Watch OS, and then a brand new OS that powers the Vision Pro, a AR VR headset. That's probably the biggest thing that people were waiting for, and they spent about 40 minutes talking about it. So I'm here to answer your questions or whatever you guys want to talk about, because I spent time with the computers. I did not spend time with the headset. That was not something that was on my schedule. But
did you say hi to Sarah Dici and Marquez?
Marquez sat behind me. I don't know him, so it's not like I can be like, hey, but I did have to get out of the way of someone who wanted to get a selfie with him.
Hey, that's something. You're famous.
I saw Sarah. I saw Justine. I leave these people alone because we're not tight, but I recognize them. Yeah. I saw the people from The Verge. Saw everyone. Good. We're all sitting in the same area.
So why don't we start with Macs?
Sure.
So we can keep people listening through the whole podcast. It's pretty much exactly what was leaked and we anticipated earlier. So, Jaron, you're using like an M1 Ultra Studio?
Yes,
Is that
I have the top of the line Studio from last year. Yeah.
Have you managed to make that thing break a sweat yet?
No, I've actually never heard it. Like the fan, I can't hear the fan ever. Nothing that I've done to it has even blinked at. Like, it's incredibly powerful, way more powerful than I think most people ever have any use for.
Yeah, I'm finally I've got a MacBook 14 Pro with the M1 Pro chip in it. And some of the 8K video is the first time that I'm actually seeing it like drop frames while editing and things like that.
You were saying that.
And for me, really, that's the important thing. Like, they can say, oh, the export times on this are this and this and this. I'm never concerned about export times, really. That's when you grab a coffee or catch up on your emails. It's how seamless is it when you're doing like heavy lifting editing jobs, and I know like VFX and animators and stuff, that's a huge thing too, is just how responsive it is. But I think they've gotten to the point where like you could use that little M2 Air for a pretty serious Final Cut job, or
you're probably
resolve multiple layers of 4K. H.265 now handles beautifully. So all of these things that we're seeing are for very high-end uses. Like, I used to consider video editing with multiple layers to be heavy lifting work, but now their base models are able to handle that. I mean, Chris has that iPad that's doing multiple streams of 8K.
Without hiccup.
Yeah, and that's the baseline M2 chip in there, right?
That's a baseline M2.
Yeah.
You know what? So again, people might not know, but I've just started using Apple products, right? I've always been a PC guy. And, I wanted to ask you, first off, the 15-inch iMac. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a new thing, right? That they're going large, still keeping it really thin.
The MacBook Air.
The MacBook
Air. The MacBook Air. Yeah, the MacBook Air being 15-inch. Like, does that have benefit for you, Jordan, for example, like traveling and stuff? Because I've always loved having a larger display. And you've always been using your little guy.
I feel like he would need more horses for his work.
Yeah, I mean, for doing like a base 4K edit with like a few layers on it, it's going to handle it just fine. It's like longer sequences, like right behind me is, the screen turned off, an M1 iMac. And I love using that for like, I'll sequence a project on it. I'll do all of my like regular work. It's a big, beautiful display. It's great that way. But then it does work its way over to the MacBook Pro when I'm doing, the fine edit, start doing the grade, things like that. I do want a little more horsepower than that. So I think I'd still run up against it with the M2 Air. But again, like that's pretty high end edit. It's not crazy high end, but it's certainly above what most consumers are going to be doing.
So
Yeah.
on this note, I actually do like I can hear a question here, and I'm going to try and explain it as best I can. That M2 Air, anyone who is just a photographer and they just want to do photo editing with Lightroom and Photoshop, that thing will sing.
That's
And
the
Crush it.
market. Yeah.
there is a limit, though. There are types of photographers where I think you want a little bit more power. And for that, I would recommend so here's what they showed. So the hands-on demos that I got were, one of them was a Mac Studio with the M2 Pro or M2 Max, sorry. So not quite as powerful as it can go, but pretty powerful. And what they showed it doing was taking multiple 100 plus megapixel phase 1 files that were bracketed. So this guy shot a landscape photo, and there was a foreground element and a background element, and he wanted it all to be the same focus. So it required like 6 or 7 150 megapixel photos to then be processed in Photoshop all at once. And it did that just fine.
Yeah.
That I think would be very difficult for other machines to handle, because that's a lot of data. And it would take quite a while. This did it in probably 40 seconds, was able to generate one finished image.
Now that
was
new
fast.
Mac Studio, I think it can go up to like 8 terabytes of storage. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. So then I'm just going to make an ass out of you and me, and then Jaron by association. If you go to the Pro, right? Do you really need the extra racks for storage? I obviously understand some.
Oh, the Mac Pro.
Yeah, the Mac Pro. Versus the Mac Studio. Which way do you think? I mean, it seems like the Mac Studio is going to work fine most of the time. We're working off external storage, anyways.
So I wrote an article about this yesterday, because I think there is this paradigm, this concept of what people think the Mac Pro is. It is no longer that computer. So the Mac Pro, from the trash can days through the one that followed it to the one, the cheese grater one, the concept behind the Mac Pro is this is the most powerful computer Apple makes. It sits at the very top of their computer line, and it's there alone. That is not the case anymore.
Yeah.
The Mac Pro is identical to the Mac Studio with the same processor in it. You can spec them identically. The only difference now is the Mac Pro has PCIe inputs for use, like putting an Avid card in there. So there's an SDI inputs in there. So this storage is extremely niche. Extremely. And you don't need the extra storage thing is not even the main point of it, because for anyone who's using a Studio, there's plenty of inputs on it. You can just external storage from the outside. You don't need it in the computer. And with Thunderbolt, it's plenty fast. It's faster to go on Apple's internal storage, obviously, but it's plenty fast. So what they've created is a computer for an extremely small niche group of people that cannot be outfitted with as much memory as the previous computers could. You're capped at, I think, 192 gigabytes, which, I mean, I personally don't know anyone who needs more than that, but there are people who would probably like more than that. But they're the same niche people that they're making the Pro for, which makes it kind of a confusing purchase. You would get it if you need access to the PCIe inputs and you want to, rack mount it or whatever. But then it doesn't get quite as powerful as maybe you would want. So I'm not sure what really is happening. I don't know that like there's an answer to that. But basically, there was a time, probably you too, Jordan, where you would have decided I would consider a Mac Pro. I kind of liked what I
we had
a
one
Mac
for
Pro.
Yeah,
early days of the show. Yeah,
knowing this now, you don't probably need a Mac Pro. Yeah.
No, I mean, I see it for the people who have like proprietary, workflows that are already utilizing a bunch of PCIe stuff, like, post-production houses, stuff like that. They're like, we just want a more powerful processor. We can pull everything out of this older Mac Pro, stick it into the new one, and we get a processor graphics card update on it.
Yes.
That's who it's for, which is, again, insanely niche. And even for like high-end photographers and video professionals, even the top of the line Mac Studio is going to be overkill for a lot of you. Like I emphasize that so much as like, this M1 Mac behind me, if you're shooting H.265 4K, Like, it's great. It's not going to break a sweat until your timeline's like more than 25 minutes long.
We've been recommending the Mac Mini series is probably
Yeah.
the best value of computer you can get as a photographer right now.
I want Chris to buy one. Yeah.
It's easily enough power. They are so good at what they do. They're very small. They're fantastic. And I don't think my recommendation changes unless you are doing what Jordan is often required to do, which is shoot and edit in 8K.
Yeah.
So back to one thing you mentioned earlier, like how does it handle editing? One of the things that I saw was they had a Final Cut project open, and there were 9 streams all together on one of the inputs. So you could see all 9 at a time, and he would hit, play, and all of them would play simultaneously through the timeline. And he could make cuts, be like, all right, we're moving to camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. Some of those were 4K streams, some of them were 8K streams. It did not lose any frames. It just, yeah, sure, whatever. Just went through all of them perfectly in real time. And then it exported a 2-minute music video, basically, is what this was. It was a live performance. It exported that from the ProRes original to some other, codec in 30 seconds.
That's crazy.
And it was pulling 8K and 4K and exporting into 4K. So it's extremely capable, as it should be for $9,000. It is a very powerful machine. I think honestly, you could probably have done something similar with last year's model. But what's kind of neat, and Apple doesn't do this very often, it's the same price as last year's model. You can just get this year's model and not be like, well, maybe I should save a little money and get last year's model. It's the same price. So you can get top of the line performance, I think, for a very reasonable amount of money, which is not something you used to be able to say about high-end Apple computers, which could cost like $60,000 if you tried to spec those fully out. And I don't think you can't spend more than $12,000 now on anything Apple makes, which is, to me, wild.
I mean, I'm just concerned for my mental well-being because I need those render times when I build like a raw time-lapse sequence or export a project. Is like, at least I have enough time to like use the bathroom and get a drink from upstairs or something.
You have 30 seconds.
My brain. No, back at it. Next project.
That's right. Do you have any questions about that Vision Pro? I did not get to have any hands-on time with it to see it, but we can talk about it. I saw the presentation. I know all of the nitty-gritty.
I mean, that's what everybody's excited about, right? I mean, first off, I think it's important to say people are throwing out AR, but it's not really AR. I mean, this is mixed R. This is XR, right? This is optical pass-through, cameras, viewing reality, displaying that to your own eyes, and then whatever is inside your goggles being digitally displayed outward, right? So it's not actually AR. It looks interesting. I think everybody's struggling to find out how are we actually going to use this in any way. And so is this really just like an early test bed to show what the potential is to get developers excited? So. It seems to be aimed a lot more at work than at play.
So that's a major differentiator between Meta's products. Is Meta's products are for games. And Apple, I think, mentioned games briefly in this segment.
They were like, you can plug your PlayStation into it. Right? Like they're holding a PS5 controller during that presentation.
You could open up Steam on your Mac desktop in your your new goggles, your new Vision goggles, and you can play, it's
But then they moved past that immediately and we're like, it's basically for work and for talking, which is a very different market than what Meta goes after. And it's much smaller, and I have to say it looks a lot more comfortable to use. I can't say if it is or not, but it at least doesn't look as heavy as other VR headsets have in the past.
Definitely not. But at the same time, like, they're obviously trying to do things like scanning your face and outwardly displaying it so people can see your emotions and stuff. But as I think they've done a good job of making it compact. I do. I know people are pissed about the external battery, but that's still the technology we're at. But would you honestly still wear these out in public?
I don't think you would.
No. Yeah, no.
Would you wear it on an airplane? Guys, would you put this on an airplane?
So my concern is like, it sounds great. They're like, and you can make your airplane look like you're in the middle of a starry field watching a giant movie screen. But when the flight attendant comes in and taps me on the shoulder, it's going to scare the shit out of me.
No, they break through.
Well,
they do. Cameras detect them.
You can probably turn this feature off, but
you have to toggle it.
Yeah. They kind of appear in your frame like this. They just appear out of the sky and they come in like you. Yeah, that does sound a little scary.
It's so tough to have It's so tough to have a perspective on it because it all comes down to like, how does it feel when you're in it? And no one has used it.
There's a couple
as far
people
as
who
I've seen
have. I know that Marquez Brownlee has. And
Yeah,
I
they
know
said
that
it was comfortable.
the Wall Street Journal has, and there's some guys at The Verge who have. But the coverage of it is difficult to explain
Yeah.
to someone because you can't video what that's like. All of Apple's
Yeah.
presentation was all computer
It's all
generated.
CG.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't know what it's like until you put it on. One thing I would like us to try in the future when this becomes available to actually take out and use, it's a camera. You can
Yeah.
take pictures with it and then view those pictures later with it. So I'm going to send one of you or both of you out to go take pictures and video wearing this thing.
Yes. To the zoo. It'll
And
be
you can get to the zoo.
horrifying.
Well, and you could do 3D photos and stuff, but it seems like although that was implemented, like everybody seems to gloss over it in any sort of mention about it. So I don't know.
The
if it's
picture
fully
quality looked
implemented.
actively bad when I was
Yeah.
watching the 4K version of the keynote. I really think it's like a base level iPhone, like 2 cameras. Because they didn't even mention the spec of it.
So the displays sounded
The displays are crazy.
Crazy good, yeah.
So
The camera
cameras-
capture. Yeah.
it
Like
has to
24 million dots over 2 displays. That's pretty
yeah,
incredible.
here's the thing though. In order to do the AR part, and to clarify what Chris said, it's not actual AR. Like Google Glass was actual AR, where it was putting digital
You see
stuff
reality.
over the actual reality. These cameras need to be able to capture the reality though in a way that is believable to the wearer. So if it can do that, then I would assume it can take pictures at that resolution as well.
Right. Yeah, hard to say. I mean, what is impressive, regardless, is the amount of technology they put into this is very powerful, right? And it sounds like the cameras that they're using to detect like hand movement, position of your arm, sounds like they did that in a really powerful way. People are saying hand response is very accurate. Obviously, touching icons up in reality, in what
reality,
would be reality,
virtual reality,
flailing your hands around while people laugh at you. Touching emails and opening stuff all seems to be very accurate.
Getting tangled in the battery cord.
Yeah, you don't have to wear any like rings or peripherals on your hands.
that
for,
is
for
neat.
detection.
The fact that it
Yeah.
adjusts your hands is neat.
Is pretty cool, right? So yeah, I think that's pretty interesting, pretty powerful.
I just don't know who this is for.
Billionaires.
The
to
one
go to
use
Starbucks
case that
and
really
order through the drive-through.
the use case that jumped out to me is when they were like, oh, you can, bring a small laptop with you and then edit with dual 4K displays.
Yeah.
I'm like, if I'm like going on a trip and sitting in a hotel room, I could get a totally stacked like MacBook Pro 14 and just plug it into those goggles, and I'm not dragging around like a big monitor. That sounds really compelling to me. Whether or not it's worth $3,500, no. Like,
Well,
they're
the
gonna have to
monitor,
find
how much
other
does the
uses for
monitor
it.
cost?
Yeah, it's like 45, but I would never travel with that, right?
Exactly. So this,
yeah.
there's
That's
some
interesting.
use case here, and I'm wondering, would you keep yourself in your hotel room, or would you project yourself on the surface of the moon while you were editing these things?
Oh, there you go.
I would. Yeah, surface of moon, definitely. Actually, no. I'm gonna get Jaron's living room.
I'll take a 3D
It'll be like
picture
I'm
for you.
hanging out with you. Yeah, exactly.
And you can look over at me, and I'm just playing video games, and you can't interact with me at all because that's how it's like when I'm playing video games. All right. Well, if there's any questions from listeners, we'll see those in the comments of this video, and we'll come back to this next week if you want us to talk anything more about it. But we need to move on because we have already gone over the time that I like to allot to this. But since it's the first episode, we did have to spend more time in the intro. But this is the section I like to call "Never Read the Comments," which is the opposite of that. We're going to read the comments.
We always read the comments.
We read. So just to be clear to everyone who leaves comments on our YouTube channel, we do read them. I also read all of the comments on PetaPixel.com. So if you say something, I do see it, and these two do see it. So here we go. We're going to answer some of the ones. Last week was the Z8 review, so most of these, if not all of them, are related to that. So the first question I have for you guys, it's in reference to the buffer limitations. He says, Dark Gex, doesn't the Z8 have a UHS-2 SD card slot? I think that would help with the buffer limitations observed.
Go, Chris.
Yeah, no, it won't. I mean, it's a fast slot. That's great, but I mean, we're just talking about a camera that can throughput large files very quickly, right? I mean, it's not capable.
SD
of
is
actually handling
not
the
that
bandwidth.
fast.
Yeah.
That's something I think it's hard for people to process. It's not fast, guys. It's not that fast.
If they could do it, they would have
professional
done it.
V9, dude.
Yeah, exactly. It's if it could happen, it would happen. It can't.
Yeah.
So the tests that you did, if you use an SD card, that was a UHS 2 card.
Yeah.
And it didn't
V90
help.
cards, fastest we had. Yeah.
Yep, it doesn't help. All right.
Yeah.
With your this is from Hawaii Wushu. With your experience with other brands like Sony and Canon, do you find that the autofocus can track through the snow and rain? This has been my only gripe so far with the Z6 II and 7 II.
Yeah.
I shoot weddings, so confetti, bubbles, stray light from other light sources, splash from running in the water, etc., all interrupt the autofocus tracking. I was curious about other brands.
Yeah. It's tough to find situations to really practice that, right? I mean, we had a great opportunity. We were testing the Nikon in snow in Yellowstone, and also here in Calgary in the winter, we had that crazy snowstorm. But I will say Sony, for example, I haven't seen those issues. And I mean, they did specific setups when we tested the cameras. They'd have models, but then they'd have confetti falling from the sky, and there was all sorts of stuff blocking. And I did find the Sony system to be very accurate at just sticking with the face, staying there, ignoring things in the foreground. So I do think that there's something there where Nikon still has issues with their subject detection and autofocus remaining when there's lots of stuff in the foreground. And I do want to say it has to be lots, right? Like you were there, Jaron. Yellowstone, we had a fair amount of snow.
It was coming down.
It was coming down. So, I get it. And it was, when Jordan shot me for one of our reviews, it was big piles of fluffy snow, right? But openly spaced. In Yellowstone, it was smaller flakes, but there was lots. It was almost like fog. So it did have issues there. It did struggle. I'm sure it'll get better, but Sony generally doesn't have that same issue, not to the same degree.
I can certainly speak to it in terms of video autofocus, where I have had issues with some of the Canons will front and back focus in heavy rain, heavy snow for video recording. The Nikon, I didn't actually have clips in that demonstrating the autofocus really having issues in the heavy snow because I switched to manual focus immediately. I could tell through the viewfinder it was drifting back and forth. The Sony, their latest software, like anything that has their real-time tracking video autofocus, I have found is a little, like I haven't run into that issue yet. Bear in mind, though, I tend not to push the Sonys quite as hard. And I'm sure that part of that is, like, in terms of the elements that I'm putting them through. And I'm sure they're a lot better built now. Yeah. But I did used to work in a camera store, and we saw a lot of Sonys with moisture damage, going back more than 5 years ago. So I'm a little more cautious with those. So what I really need to do next time we got huge clumps of snow is take all three out and see how they perform now. But in my experience, I would say, for video, Sony 1, Canon 2nd, Nikon 3 in that extreme rainy, snowy situation.
As a Canon shooter, and as a Canon shooter with a Canon body standing next to the Z8 in the snow.
Yes.
Thank you. We're going to win you over this.
My Canon R5 had no problem focusing on the buffalo.
Right.
The bison in the snow. So to say that was, I think that Nikon does need to do a little work here, and we can confirm that in the exact same circumstance, because we had a Z7 II as well, it did not do well in the same environment as the Z8. So it's the same. It's a Nikon across the board issue, not a Z8 issue.
Yeah, we've had the same issue with the Z9.
Yeah. Okay. Next one is from Prime Res Property. 2 comments on the camera. Well, these are more questions than comments. When are Nikon going to implement dual redundant video recording? That's a big downside for me as a professional. So that's the first one. Do you guys think that's something they'll do?
I would hope so. I'm sure it's just a processor limitation. And remember, you can do redundancy through the HDMI port, which thankfully is a full size. So, if you can lock it, I'd be pretty comfortable doing that. But yeah, it would be great to see it. The problem with the Z8 specifically is, obviously, we've got one fast card, one slow card.
It wouldn't happen in that kind of camera.
It wouldn't work
but
with
Z9,
a lot of
right?
the record modes. With Z9, absolutely. I think it makes sense. And it does such a great job of writing full-size RAWs to both cards at the same time. The technology is there. I'm sure it'll come along. And Nikon has been getting better with firmware, so hopefully we see that. It would be great to see.
Question 2 is there a difference in overheating time between recording one continuous movie clip versus lots of short ones with short gaps in between? For example, is the actual recording that makes the camera hot, or is it just having the camera switched on and in video mode?
It is the recording, because its preview is coming from a subsampled image while you're looking through, because there's no reason it needs to send a 45 megapixel to, a 2 million dot and a 3.69 million dot display. That makes no sense. So yeah, when we were shooting in Yellowstone, that was almost exclusively 8K with a little bit of slow-mo, which is also demanding on that sensor. And we had no issues recording continuously for an entire day. So although bear in mind, it was quite cold while we were out there too. So,
Yeah.
um,
Helps.
yeah. So your mileage, we always say your mileage will vary. Wait for Dan Watson, who will go use things for full days in Florida. He's the real master of the stress test. But with most cameras, if you're starting and stop recording, don't worry too much about that preview feed. It doesn't usually add too much to your overheating issues.
Patriot Steve says that it is far overpriced and far underperforming. Reviewers, that's you guys, are afraid to alienate a potential income source. So let's break this one down. Is it far overpriced?
No, not at all. No, I mean, we're taking a camera that I think people have to appreciate. The Z8, it shouldn't be marketed as like the every person's camera. This isn't like a camera like a D700 or D750 kind of camera where it's, price pointed, good capabilities, everybody can get some good shots with it. This is still a very professional camera. So you got to look at it as it's a professional grade flagship camera at a substantially lower price point than the actual flagship camera. And again, to their credit, they really didn't take away many features or specs from the Z9 to the Z8. So I think it is a really good deal if you are the kind of person who needs demanding, has demanding needs and needs a powerful camera to meet those.
So
I have
on that.
two.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the two things I definitely want to mention is, first of all, this is the least expensive launch we've ever seen for a camera with a stacked full frame sensor. Those things are expensive. We hear this over and over from all the camera companies. The other thing that I think is really important is when the Z9 came out, like its flagship cameras don't tend to sell that well. They're extremely niche things, but the price on the Z9 was super aggressive for the same reason Chris touched on in his review. Like they're trying to get market share right now.
Yeah.
So, they're like, well, it's not that much less expensive than a Z9. Well, the Z9 was the cheapest flagship camera that came out in that launch of all of those full frame stacked sensor flagships. So yeah, the pricing makes a lot of sense to me.
Doesn't sound like it's an underperforming camera either. I would say that.
No,
that's
not at
also
all.
accurate.
And let's appreciate also that this is a powerful video camera and photo camera.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an incredibly good hybrid camera. So you're really getting a lot for the money that you're putting into it. And I think also Patriot Steve can take solace in the fact that because Nikon is in this position where they're obviously trying to get a lot of market share, and I feel like they're pricing these things pretty aggressively, that also bodes well. Because I get it. I get that there's a sentiment. We actually see this in a lot of comments, especially Leica comments and stuff, right? Where people are like, oh, like, the price point is an affront to me as a person, right? Like you're pricing these things out of like regular people's hands. I'm like, I get the sentiment. I'm not a wealthy person. I get it, but the world's always been this way. There's always been Rolexes and Timexes and then Casios, right? Like it's just the way it works. So I feel like what's positive about Nikon is they need the market share. They want to sell cameras. So we're going to see other cameras below the Z8. And I would hope optimistically that we're going to have these same kind of capabilities where it's going to be a powerful camera, it's going to be a capable camera, and it's going to be priced very affordably relative to other brands. And I think that'll be a good thing for consumers. So rather than say, oh, Nikon's making it really hard for consumers, I think we should look at this as actually Nikon's making this very positive for consumers. And it might even put pressure on the other brands to then have to compete favorably for people's business. I mean, the D750 was such a popular SLR. We compare the Z8 to the D850. So can we not also optimistically see a future mirrorless D750 modern camera come out fairly soon? Maybe. And I'm sure it'll be priced very aggressively.
I can actually speak to that last bit where we're afraid to alienate a potential income source. Look at my history. I have never once not written a story because I was afraid to alienate a company. I have regularly held feet to the fire. So like I tell everyone on my team, these two included, do not feel like you have to do that. We care most about the truth than we care about anything else.
Everybody earlier in the podcast may have heard the part where Fujifilm's not sending us an XS20.
Yeah, there we go.
So let's just keep that in mind, right? It's not like we're pandering.
Exactly. We don't ever do that.
And it was rough.
Most camera companies actually like that we do this because it confirms that we are a trustworthy independent source. And we are. All right, I'm going to move on to the next couple questions because we're running out of time here. Jordan, this one's kind of at you. Do you feel the same way? Inci Netinai, boy, these are hard to say. Kind of makes me wish Nikon would make a video-centric camera that wasn't trapped in a photo body. Do you think that?
I've said this many times. I love a photo body for the kind of work that I do. Out on the street, it's less obtrusive. People don't look at you the same way as back when we ran around with Sony cinema cameras to shoot our show. And everyone's like, are you with the news? I have a political perspective I would like to share with you. It's great to have that like smaller, more discreet body. I love shooting with an EVF. So most cinema bodies don't have that. But yeah, if I'm shooting on set, it would be awesome to have a Z9 in like a box version of it that could be very easily rigged into different configurations. Panasonic does that. They've got their two main sensors you can get in a box version. If you look at the Sony FX cameras, they're Sony's mirrorless cameras in a different shape. So
what you're saying is it's not held back by the body design, really.
No.
For me personally, like it's a pain if you do want to use it in a cage. You have to get a Nikon specific small rig cage or something like that, right? Where if it's a box camera, you can just rig it into any custom setup. But by and large, like the capabilities are there. The only other thing is obviously if you're rolling 8K 60p RAW, this camera's going to overheat. It'd be nice to see a fan on another version of it. But that is such a niche use case. Like filmmakers are not shooting that. It's like
Nikon
one special effects shot.
Nikon could do it. I think it's the one company out of all the ones that we just talked about that don't have a history or a pedigree in video production as well as photography, right? So I don't know.
Yeah.
We wouldn't use it.
DPs, ACs, they don't want to learn new camera systems. And Nikon has never had a history of that. So it's going to be a slow go for them to get into like that high-end production world. I think they're targeting the right audience for them, which is like, enthusiast, mid-range, corporate video production. The Z8, Z9 are going to kill it in those situations. Yeah. I think if they made something for high-end productions, it would just be very slow to be accepted because
it cost them a lot of money. It would not be easily. So speaking from experience, I used to work at a photographic lighting company, and we could never get in on the movie production scenes because Chimera, which pronounces their own company name incorrectly, it should be Chimera. Chimera owns that space. And as you said, nobody wants to learn anything new. They just want to be able to grab what they know and use it immediately. And trying to get them to try new lighting equipment, even if it was built exactly the same way, if the brand wasn't on there just right, they're just immediately going to dismiss it. So to that end, it's not easy to get into that high-end space. And for most companies, it is not the right decision because it'll cost them a lot of money and there's no guarantee of success.
Can I just say, Jaron, I that's funny that you mentioned that because it's off topic, but I was going to give you such a hard time last time I heard you say Chimera. And I was like, no, that's not how you say it. That's terrible.
That's how they say it.
That's terrible. That's an affront to Greek classic literature. Okay.
And what's funny too is their logo used to actually be a chimera until they changed it to a sunspot. So like, I know you can't lie to me. I know the truth. All right, well, everyone, that is it for this week's episode. We want to again thank OM System for making truly incredible cameras. Again, you can get up to 40% on brand new OM System cameras and their Zuiko lens series on omsystem.com. Link in the description. Guys, thanks for joining me. We'll do this again next week. Appreciate you guys being here. You guys look fantastic too. Love your sets.
Thank you.
For everyone who's listening. Oh, what? Yes.
People in the comments can tell me what color they want to see in the background next. I'll switch it up. Blue's nice, but we got a very blue theme going on. I'll change colors next week.
Jordan's
and
quite
I'll
warm.
go the opposite.
Okay, he'll be in the middle. Okay,
Jordan will be black and white next week.
I can change these if you want to. I don't know. I just chose PetaPixel blue, but I'll go with whatever. All right, so that is it. Thank you, gentlemen, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.